afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's online briefing, where we'll be discussing the hidden costs of building bespoke software. My name is Dan Baker, and I lead the solution engineering team here at Clear Dynamics. I started my career as a software developer, and after 10 years of building software and leading teams building software, I moved into the sort of consulting and solution engineering space, where I've continued working with teams and organizations to solve solutions using both pre-built or like off-the-shelf software and bespoke custom software. And today I'm joined by Sarah Louise McDonald, or as I call her, SL. She's the CEO of TBF Digital. SL, would you like to say a few words of introduction?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, and hi, I'm Sarah Louise. Everybody just calls me SL. I've spent the last 20 years working across ICT strategy and digital delivery, mostly in government and regulated sectors. My background is in enterprise architecture and leading software delivery teams, and I've had the chance to work on some pretty complex transformation programs. Before joining TBF Digital as a CEO, I led the software engineering practice at Synergy Group, and before that I worked with Pegasystems on large platform implementations, looking at both, again, low-code, no-code COTS installs and bespoke software. I spent a big part of my career actually reviewing software for customers and reviewing projects to see where they've failed or where they've gone well. These days, I focus on helping organisations design and deliver digital services that are secure, scalable, and genuinely fit for purpose with TBF Digital.
Awesome. Thanks, SL. So I'd actually like today to start today's discussion with two quotes. So the first one is that nothing is permanent except change. I'm going to pronounce his name. I think it's pronounced Heraclitus. He was a Greek philosopher, and this quote could not be more relevant in today's tech landscape. The rate of technology change is exponentially increasing every year. And, if you just think about the fact that like generative AI and LLMs really burst onto the scene only, 2, 3, or 4 years ago, and now they're sort of the advancements are so rapid and they're really everywhere in every software product. So what it means is that no business can stand still and hope to remain competitive. And it also means that systems that were fit for purpose last year could already be outdated, now. So analysts say that technical debt of systems is a $1.5 trillion problem globally, and this is increasing every year. And for this reason, organizations need to continually evolve their technology by updating or replacing legacy systems and undergoing, modernization projects. However, my second quote is 66% of all technology projects end in partial or total failure. This is a statistic released by the Standish Group. So on the one hand, we're saying that organizations must undertake technology modernization projects in order to remain competitive. But on the other hand, we're also saying that 2/3 of all projects fail. So it's not really a good situation to be in as a technology leader. SL, are there any sort of failed projects that you've been involved with or learnings that you've taken from projects?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, look, I won't name the programs directly here. I've had the chance to review a number of large digital transformations that didn't achieve their intended outcomes. What stood out to me wasn't just the missed deadlines or the cost blowouts, it was how familiar the patterns were. In most cases, the projects were overscoped from the start, trying to solve too much in one go, rather than starting with something incremental and building capability over time. They attempted wholesale transformation with very rigid governance models laid on top. That tends to create a system that can't adapt, where decisions are delayed or watered down because nobody owns the product vision end to end. Two of the programs that I really caught a mention were major failures. I would say they were running a Wagile model where the worst parts of waterfall and agile were mashed together. So there was a backlog and a stand up, but in reality, the program was still locked into a fixed scope and delivery date. The Standish Group, as you mentioned, has published plenty of evidence over the years showing that large, complex IT projects with rigid governance fail far more often than smaller, iterative efforts. In fact, their chaos reports consistently show that projects with iterative delivery and empowered product ownership are more likely to succeed. Another theme for me was the relationship between the business and a system integrator. Um, in both programs that I'm thinking of, the relationship had become adversarial. Delivery partners weren't seen as co-creators, but as outsiders to manage or control. And that dynamic eroded trust and made collaboration near impossible. It also created perverse incentives. So rather than aligning around a shared outcome, everyone focused on managing blame and protecting position. A final issue I saw was a desire, and really the theme of today's conversation, to customize or bespoke low code platforms to replicate outdated business processes. That often stems from not having a clear future state vision or being unwilling to let go of legacy thinking. When you try to force modern platforms to behave like the systems they were meant to replace, you're not transforming, you're just recreating old inefficiencies with newer tech. And Gartner's actually warned about this in their research on low code misuse. Without strong design governance and product thinking, you actually risk building tomorrow's legacy today. What would I have done differently? I start smaller, build a product team with real decision making authority, and use delivery as a mechanism for learning, not just output. Focusing on the outcome, not the tech, because the best systems are the ones people actually want to use. What about you,
Hmm.
Dan?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think in my experience, like when I was a software developer, I found that a lot of projects you maybe would call them successful at the end of what you would call the project. So, maybe it's a 6 month project and you get to the end of the 6 months and you go, it's successful. I think where I saw maybe projects fail is after the project had finished because organizations a they didn't really have a plan for how to say maintain that software after the official project had finished. And so, and I'm not sure how it would necessarily fit into the statistic that we've got of 66% of projects failing, but in my experience, I think, probably most of the projects were considered success at the end of the project, but then a year later they were probably considered not a success anymore, because they didn't plan for how to continue to maintain those bespoke software systems beyond the life of the project. It's not something like, bespoke software is not something where you can just build it and go, right, it's done, I don't have to touch it again. You generally need more of that product mindset where you build it and then you plan to refine it on an ongoing basis. I guess just, more broadly speaking, when we talk about technology modernization, I would break these into sort of two separate pathways that you can take in order to modernize a system. The first would be commercial off-the-shelf software, or COTS. And I think this is an excellent solution when the functionality of the software matches the requirements of an organization. Um, like, and you get all the economies of scale by doing this. Like if 10 organizations are all using the same software to solve the same problem, it's much more efficient, and therefore usually cheaper than building everything bespoke. But where this is problematic is where your COTS package only supports 80% or 70% of the functionality, and then you need to customize it beyond what its intended purpose is or what its out of the box capabilities are. Then in my experience, I've seen organizations run into a lot of different issues there. So commercial off the shelf is one option. Bespoke software, like building it from scratch, would be your other option from a technology modernization perspective. And this provides, like bespoke software provides the flexibility that you need to build exactly what you want. Like as an organization, you've probably got your special sauce that makes the organization tick and work exactly how you want it to. Building something bespoke can provide exactly that. But the problem is that, not all organizations necessarily have the expertise in order to support that bespoke software development. They maybe don't have the desire. And I guess, as we're going to discuss today, they don't necessarily understand how to cost, like what is the total cost of ownership going to be of building and then maintaining that bespoke software. And it's really, I think, a trap that some organizations fall into where they just go, oh yeah, we can build this, and then they haven't adequately planned for how to maintain it going forward. Which again, I guess then just brings us to the question of, what are the costs of bespoke software? So I might just get your thoughts on that, Estelle.
Yeah, look, I think I guess, segue into what are the costs. To your point, there are the two options with our commercial off-the-shelf products. Many of those are highly configurable, and bespoke. And by bespoke, we mean build it from scratch. You get a coder in, they write .NET or Java, and they deploy an application. When people talk about bespoke software, they usually focus on the upfront build cost, and it seems that it would be cheaper. Right? On paper, you have two, maybe three developers cutting code for 6 months, 12 months, and it seems cheaper than a licensing cost. But what is often overlooked are the long-term costs of ownership, and that's where most projects come undone. And to your point, Dan, earlier, that's that long-term cost of maintenance. There's a persistent myth that bespoke is cheaper because you're not paying the license fees, but that's not really how the economics play out. You're actually trading vendor costs for the cost of running your own engineering function, your own support, patching, security, enhancements, monitoring indefinitely, and you can't share those costs across the market like a product company does. McKinsey actually found that large IT projects run 45% over budget and deliver 56% less value than expected. And Gartner analysis shows that 80% of the total cost of ownership is incurred after go live through rework, maintenance, and fixes. That's where bespoke can get really expensive really quickly. It's not just the code, it's everything around it. If you're going bespoke, you need mature engineering governance, documented design patterns, version control, proper code reviews, automated testing, CI/CD pipelines, rollback strategies. If you don't cost for these things up front, you end up with brittle, unscalable systems that rely on a handful of developers to keep them running. Your code base becomes your risk register. And the longer you go without incrementally improving that software, the harder it gets. I've seen it. Mystery cron jobs eating 90% CPU, devs rotating API keys manually, rebooting servers to clear memory leaks in the middle of the night, retry logic on top of retry logic. Everyone's hoping that the product stays alive until the end of the financial year, but nobody wants to touch it.
Right. So I guess what you're saying there is that you're not necessarily locked in by the technology, but you're locked in because you don't understand how it works and nobody necessarily wants to take ownership or responsibility for it.
Absolutely, because you haven't invested in maintaining it and maintaining the quality of that custom code. If you're using bespoke builds to replicate legacy processes rather than designing for a future state operating model, you're just rebuilding old inefficiencies with modern tools. You might save 500K in licensing fees, but spend 1.5 million stabilizing the thing over 3 years. That's not transformation, that's standing still expensively.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is bespoke isn't necessarily cheaper, but you're sending the invoice later.
Yeah, but I mean, look, bespoke can absolutely be the right choice, but only when you've got the engineering discipline and delivery maturity to support it. The smarter move is to reserve bespoke code for when you're creating real differentiation and use proven scalable platforms for everything else.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, and from my perspective as well, I think there is a difference between using bespoke or building bespoke software from scratch, where you're like building a system from scratch, versus bespoke functionality that you're building into like a commercial off-the-shelf package. Um, and if we focus just on like that COTS, like bespoke on top of COTS for a sec, um, what I've seen is that when you build a whole lot of bespoke functionality on top of a COTS package, you're really losing like the upgradability. So I've seen lots of cases where people are like, right, we bought this package and then we've customized it to the nth degree, and now it's 10 years later and we can't update it, and there's this massive project we basically throw away and rebuild the whole thing every time in order to get to the latest version. And then you're basically losing like a lot of the advantage of being on a COTS product because usually you're getting this incremental value by having your vendor kind of adding new functionality, and you just can't get that. Another thing that I've seen is with the tooling. So often when you're building bespoke solutions on top of like an off-the-shelf package, it doesn't necessarily have like the tooling that you need in order to build a robust solution. Like if you think, automated testing and CI/CD and um, all of the things that aren't just the code, but everything that goes around, like around the bespoke solution that you're building on top of COTS, it's just not necessarily there. I don't know, is that something you've run into in your career?
Yeah, look, it's interesting actually because a project that I did, just before coming to my role as the CEO of TBF was in fact for a federal government client uplifting 27,000 lines of custom code, removing it from a COTS product so that they could migrate the system to cloud to get the latest security capability so that it was actually a secure solution. And that 27,000 lines of code didn't happen overnight. It was a customization and the death of a thousand cuts, right? It was a developer going, sure, I'm going to write 3 lines of code to deliver a different color button, or I want, a line, a field to be specifically displayed in a certain way. That was done over years, and it got to the point that it was so customized that the customer couldn't actually move to cloud. They couldn't move their data, move their system to the latest secure infrastructure. They were running an old version of the solution, which was actually hampering their modernization efforts. So really, that custom code became a 12-month long project just to get to the latest secure version of an application stack that didn't really need to happen. And I think that's the lesson for me was in many instances the customization wasn't required. If the customer had worked with the vendor would have put enhancements into the product rather than, the customer's developers just cutting code on top of a COTS product, which wasn't maintained. There was certainly security risk in a lot of that code, which is really problematic, particularly for our clients with TBF, where they're highly regulated. We deal with a lot of airports and airlines and utility sector and mining, where the type of data can cost our clients. It can cost them millions and millions of dollars in loss if they lose their data. And a lot of the customization is actually really putting a lot of risk into your platforms. And the thing is too, with customization, I always think if we want to cost it, and we are talking about the cost of bespoke software, for every custom component, you really need to factor in, you need one FTE to maintain that, right?
Yeah.
So, and I mean component, not lines of code, but every custom component, and they should be updating their skills, right? They should be um, not, their last kind of training shouldn't have been in the 90s when they did their software engineering degree. You need to invest in actually training that resource, and they need to be working on enhancements every 3 months. That's how fast security is moving. That's how fast technology enhancement is working. So if you're going to write customization on top of a COTS product, you really need to cost in that maintenance, right? That one
Yeah.
FTE for every component.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And you mentioned the security as well. And I think it's not just relevant, like security in particular and compliance, it's not just relevant to building a bespoke solution on top of COTS, but it's also very relevant to building bespoke solutions from scratch, where you're actually planning to build something from scratch. Like, we've worked with a number of customers who have had bespoke solutions, and a lot of them have actually started as shadow IT, I would say, where someone who's not always necessarily a software developer, but they're technical, they're part of a business unit somewhere, they've built a bespoke solution, um, and over the years, that solution has become mission critical to the organization. And because it wasn't built necessarily with like scalability in mind, um, and it wasn't really productionized, it's got all sorts of issues. And security is often, the number one concern when it comes to like organizational risk, especially when we're talking about, organizations that work in a kind of regulated environment where they absolutely need to have everything secure and up to date. Um, that's something that we run into fairly regularly in these sort of shadow IT use cases where they come to us for a number of different risk reasons. Security is often number one. Another one is also like a people risk, where it's sort of, there's only a few people who really understand how that bespoke software work. And so if those people were to leave, no one would be able to maintain it. Even if those people are still there, like actually pushing updates to that bespoke software can be a real issue as well. And then even just if you take away shadow IT and you just said, just bespoke software in general, in my opinion, like the cost of all the non-functional requirements are what are severely underestimated in a lot of situations where you don't have really experienced kind of engineers involved in involved in that costing process to work out the total cost of ownership. So I think of stuff like all of the itties, like scalability, availability, resiliency, like all of those non-functional requirements. They're what really become like the hidden cost of bespoke software. And they're why, we talk to some customers who say 80% of our software developers are just on BAU, keeping the systems up. And it's because of all of those non-functional requirements. They're not adding new features, they're just keeping the thing running because they're sort of struggling with all of those non-functional requirements.
Yeah, look, and this is where SaaS platforms are really useful, right? Because if you're using this, one of the reasons we partner obviously with Clear Dynamics, and we partner with a lot of product vendors is from TBF's perspective, we feel for our customers, there's a lot of savings in letting the engineering companies, the companies that are actually selling their software to multiple customers, investing in the product, investing in the security, investing in the patching, investing in the enhancements, monitoring the environment through a SaaS platform like Clear Dynamics. uh, that saves a lot of money, and you don't have that reliance on individuals because as a firm that engineers product, you're actually you're investing in maintaining it because you get that economy of scale through selling licenses. Um, and I think unless you really, really need that custom code, and there are certainly areas to the point that you raised earlier, Dan, where it's a critical differentiator, that it makes sense for you to invest in it, but do it wisely. I think if you can actually avoid that cost of having just people sit there basically keeping the lights on, monitoring your system all day, and making sure that it's patched. I think it's not just the headcount, as I mentioned earlier, it's the training. One of the things that we do as a services firm is we partner with ACS, and where our staff are expected to do training all the time. We do regular security briefings to our staff. We have weekly updates because we're in the business of just building tech for customers, and working with our vendors to suggest enhancements where we have multiple customers that have a requirement. We bring those to our vendors because we know that it's better for our vendor to enhance the product with all of their engineering rigor than it is for our customers to go and invest in that bit of custom kit on the side. It seems easier in the moment, but the reality is you might be better off waiting 6 months for your vendor to do an enhancement and living with it, whatever that requirement is, without having it, than having your team custom code it, and then you've got to have a person maintain that component, and that you've got all those additional costs that we've been speaking about on top.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. Um, so moving on, like from my perspective at least, where does Clear Dynamics fit into this conversation? So we have built an enterprise-grade software development platform that allows us to build bespoke software solutions without worrying about all of the hidden costs of normal bespoke development that we've been talking about. So things like CI/CD pipelines and version control, they're built into the platform, and it removes all the DevOps overhead required for most bespoke software builds. From a security and compliance perspective, the platform's ISO 27001 and SOC 2 Type 2 certified, and we have regular penetration testing, which means that organizations that are operating in those regulated spaces can deploy mission critical applications in their environments. The architecture and the software that we provide is what we would call evergreen. And it means that both the software and the architecture is continuously and automatically updated to the latest versions. And this ensures that, the solution that you're building today doesn't just become tomorrow's legacy software that's riddled with technical debt. And finally, many elements of our platform are also what I would call AI-assisted low code. And it means that we can effectively develop solutions order of magnitudes faster than what you could do using, traditional bespoke methods. And so our customers typically choose to work with us because they've looked at the market in terms of what they can get off the shelf. Um, and nothing really exists to meet their needs without requiring, either significant organizational changes or significant sort of customizations to that off-the-shelf product. They want a solution that allows them to keep their special sauce and, what makes the organization really tick. But they don't necessarily want to invest in an entire team of software engineers to build and maintain a bespoke system. They don't want to deal with all of the complexities of that and, all of those non-functional requirements, which, are hard to kind of understand up front. And so in effect, a lot of our customers, what they want is a bespoke solution that's delivered more like a SaaS off-the-shelf product. And that's basically what we provide. That's exactly what we provide. It's really this, it's sort of a custom solution for our customers that's delivered as though it's a pre-built solution. Did you want to tell us a little bit more about TBF Digital and work?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And look, TBF Digital is a digital services provider. Like I said, we provide developers, testers, BAs, application designers for regulated industries. We largely work in the utilities and airports and mining sector. We also do some work for government, and I noticed some of our friends from Synergy have joined us today. They're also a partner of ours, and Clear Dynamics who work in government. So TBF Digital as a group has a product called Work that was developed under TBF Digital. It's a separate arm of our group of companies. Work is a lightweight business rules engine. It's designed specifically for compliance and regulation and audit heavy processes. It's not a general purpose platform like Clear Dynamics, and it's not trying to be one. Work is a COTS product which exists to make complex policy driven decision making simple, traceable, and auditable. It's used in domains like security clearances, eligibility assessments, field inspections, and permissions management, where decisions need to be applied consistently, governed tightly, and updated easily as legislation or internal policy shifts. Work gives teams the ability to configure, version, and test rules independently of the system interface with a strong focus on transparency and accountability. Now, when we look at Work, how it fits alongside Clear Dynamics, it's important to understand that these platforms aren't in competition. They actually solve different but highly complementary problems. Clear Dynamics is incredibly strong at orchestrating modular components to build scalable business applications, whether you're modernizing a core legacy system, digitizing a service, or building something new. It provides the end-to-end workflow integration layer and presentation logic, whereas Work slots in neatly when that application needs to make a rules-based decision that can't be hard-coded, something that needs to be explainable, auditable, and capable of standing up to external scrutiny. So what I mean by that is human readable scrutiny. Think about use cases where policy complexity is high and compliance matters, the kind of work you don't want buried deep in application logic or custom code. With Work, you can externalize that decision logic, manage it through a governance framework, and make changes rapidly without destabilizing the rest of your application. This lets Clear Dynamics do what it does best, deliver modern modular apps, while Work quietly handles the rules behind the scenes. Together, they create a powerful combination, a modern, flexible user-facing system underpinned by transparent, compliant decisioning, the kind of architecture that delivers not just digital services, but trusted digital services, especially in regulated sectors like government, health, and finance. So when we talk about platforms like Work and CD at TBF, we're not talking about a choice. We're talking about fit-for-purpose tools solving different layers of the same problem. And the real value comes when you bring them together to get an end-to-end solution to make sure that your organization is delivering that special sauce that Dan speaks about and is compliant.
Yeah. Like the way that I think about it is like, yeah, when you've got these compliance problems, you'd look at work, like an off-the-shelf product that specializes in that, that meets all of those requirements. I just feel like it's an obvious choice to go down that path where the requirements match, and it's really where you're trying to do something beyond like what's out of the box. You obviously have the choice to build like bespoke, like you could go and build bespoke software. But that's really where like I feel like a platform like Clear Dynamics really excels is doing the things that make your organization unique, and it's not necessarily something that everyone in the industry is going to want.
Yeah, look, and we see this for our clients, our existing clients of work, is something that we're saying to them, particularly for their upstream processes. Really, think about replacing these shadow IT and legacy tech with Clear Dynamics because that enhances the data quality coming into your regulation platform. Work's got all of the cybersecurity rules, risk frameworks that are used by whole of government and regulated industries. So it's already got all the airport compliance rules built in. It's designed for that. That's where our clients come to us in mining or regulated sectors. The platform's got all the rules built in. So, and those rules are industry standard, right? But
Yep.
one of the challenges we have is we have a lot of customers where the data that feeds into their regulation and compliance processes is largely being collected in those legacy bespoke apps that are maintained by two or three people, and the only people that know how they work are retiring next year, right? And for us, and the ongoing cost of sustaining a direct bespoke replacement, as we've discussed, would be pretty exorbitant long term. For what the organization is built for. They're not an engineering organization. In most cases, our clients, they have a core business, whether that's government or private sector. They're not in the business of engineering software. They're in the business of keeping the lights running and delivering customer value. And so for us, it makes sense to, Clear Dynamics would be a clear winner, right? To be up front of a workflow tool like Work for your compliance processes, particularly with how CD works around its data ingest first and cleaning up the data. I think one of the costs of Bespoke is that you end up with a really messy data model. And the beauty of a tool like CD is that it actually enables you to clean that up, and it's really easy to interface with your data to share it to tools like Work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We will leave it there. But look, thank you everyone for joining, and thanks Estelle for joining me as well. Yeah, I really enjoyed our discussion.
Thanks, Dan. It's always great chatting to you, and thank you everyone for showing up.
Awesome. Thanks everyone.
Yeah.